So this is CJ Baker, and this is episode 22 of the Ongoing History of Protest Music, companion podcast to the website ongoinghistoryofprotestmusic.com. Our special guest is longtime activist and singer-songwriter David Rovics. So I'd like to thank you for being here.
A pleasure. Thank you.
So, of course, we're doing this over Zoom, so we are definitely social distancing. So
That's
how
for
have you
sure.
been
No
making
masks
out?
required.
Yeah. So how have you been making out with the pandemic?
Well, I've been doing okay, but it's just kind of squeaking by, and and financially, and just not enjoying the fact that we can't do gigs and that the schools are all canceled, and everything else. There's so many problems with it. But what's most distressing is to see how badly it's affecting so many other people in terms of here in the US in particular, and just in my own world, and where we are not getting, so there's not the sort of sensible state policies that you've been having up in Canada where you are. It's been it's just so hard for a lot of people, because they're just not getting any help, and so many people are unemployed and facing the possibility of eviction, and there's real hunger and all kinds of. You see it in the streets, every day it gets worse.
Yeah, a lot of challenges. I know, and we're gonna obviously be discussing it. But I know with your music, you definitely address a lot of those issues that you just mentioned.
Yeah, definitely.
Have you been doing a lot of live streaming?
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of live streaming, definitely. And I really was avoiding, just for no good reason at all, but I was avoiding really learning some of the basic skills involved with broadcasting and home recording. And I just didn't want to try to take on one more thing. And but then when the pandemic hit, clearly this was what you needed to do. So yeah, I did learn how to effectively use a USB mic so it actually sounds good with a guitar. And I've been doing a lot of live streaming, and it's been fun. And it's no replacement for playing in the real world, but it's really, there's a lot of cool aspects to it, especially the way you can completely overcome geography and have events that are way more international than they would likely be in the real world.
Yeah, I guess that's the one cool thing about it. Like even with myself, I'm able to see some artists perform that I just wouldn't have the circumstances to.
Absolutely. Being near Toronto, of course, a lot of artists do come to Toronto, but of course not everybody does. That's for sure.
So we mentioned you're both an activist and a singer-songwriter, and with your music, you're actually quite prolific. I know most years you seem to be releasing multiple albums. I know this year you've released 4 albums already, and I know you, on a regular basis, write topical songs that you post online. So what inspires you to be so prolific with your music?
It definitely goes in waves, but I've been definitely writing at a much faster pace since the pandemic. There's just always a lot to write about, and a lot of people thought that Trump's election would be a big inspiration for writing material, and certainly I have gotten a lot out of Trump, but I don't think he's necessarily easy to write about, or I don't think what he represents is necessarily easy to write about. It's actually very complicated. Yeah. But definitely there's just been so much happening since last March especially, and not that there wasn't much there's plenty happening before then. I was writing a lot before then too, but especially since March, I've been writing probably 1 or 2 songs every week, along with a lot of other stuff. And it's just, I'm also as much of a news junkie as I was before the pandemic. I am even more of a news junkie now, and I just want to keep up on everything that's going on. And there's so much happening, even for a veteran news junkie. It's really quite a lot to try to keep up on.
Yep, and you definitely do a good job of keeping up with it. Like your
I
song,
try. I
like your
try.
music definitely almost works like you're a journalist on occurring events that are
Especially
happening.
the last album. I mean, I'm the last album. Portland has been so much in the
Yeah.
headlines, and I'm in Portland, and the last album is almost all songs about what's been going on in Portland over the past few months. So, and especially in the last album, I'm definitely being a journalist. Yeah.
And I know you mentioned your last album, which I know was Say Their Name, which I think you just released probably just, I
Yep.
guess, basically a few days ago.
Yep.
So you mentioned a lot of that chronicles the past couple of months of the protest in Portland. So you're also
Mm.
actively involved in the protest in Portland, right?
Yeah, I've been. Well, I mean, I've been involved in terms of attending
Okay.
and singing at and trying to spread the word about them. And so, yeah, in various ways, I'm not in the center of activity or going to protests every night or anything like that. But I'm involved, and I'm also especially involved with trying to organize an eviction defense network here, and basically. I mean, as important as the protests are that are going on, I'm trying to involve a lot of the protesters in eviction defense stuff, because I think that's going to be something they're all already going to be, well, they're already getting involved in, and they're going to be getting involved with it more. I mean, because people are inevitably making these important connections that if Black Lives Matter, then it's not just a matter of white people overcoming their internal biases and stuff like that. It's a matter of things like affordable housing for everybody.
Yeah. Because it's
And
great if
yeah,
the police don't beat them up, but they still need a place to live in.
absolutely. We
Yeah.
need police not beating people, and we need affordable housing, and we need universal health care, and a lot of other things. But the basic thing with is I mean, the Black Lives Matter is a concept that basically, under the current circumstances of life in the world, it means that humanity in all forms matters, because it has to be, and therefore Black lives have to matter. I mean, that's because
Yeah, but I know that's something you even addressed with the album, like Say Their Name. Like on the album cover, you have a list of the Black lives that were murdered by police officers.
Mm. Yeah, and the song, the title track, just sort of goes into 10 of them a bit, but and other tracks are just about one particular case, of which I've written many, but there are way too many in reality to even possibly write about, or to even know about, to even say their names, But and then on the poster, which a wonderful graphic artist from Florida designed, the poster names a lot more names than the song does.
Yeah. So we mentioned you're based in Portland and you've had a chance to attend some of the protests. So Portland, of course, is one of those places we tend to hear quite a bit about in terms of protests with the media. So there's a certain narrative and certain conflict in reports. So what would you like to tell people about what's like really going on in Portland?
I mean, I would say probably the most fundamental thing that I would say everyone should know, whether or not they do, about Portland and about every other city in the United States, that the overwhelming majority of the violence of any kind, like at least 99% of it, is being committed by the police. And the police are attacking people for the crime of marching in the streets. And recently, since the Portland police have been deputized as federal agents a couple of weeks ago, they have been arresting people before they even leave the park and even take to the streets. They've been arresting people for possessing things like leaf blowers, helmets, and shields. Meanwhile, the far right is going around with loaded automatic weapons and being completely left alone. So that's what's happening here. That's what's happening in Louisville. That's what's happening in lots of different cities across the country. And the police are essentially, I mean, the police are basically the ranks of the police are loaded with members of people who believe in far right ideology. And that's true all over the country. And I think actually that's true in much of the world. I mean, it's just, if you live in a society where police have the opportunity to sort of carry out arbitrary brutality against people they don't like, especially members of marginalized groups. You know, if that's what the police basically do, then they're going to attract people that want to do those things. And in some cases, and like in Greece, it's there's statistics where, because police vote by workplace, and we can say for sure that at least in 2012, 50% of the police in at least one neighborhood in Athens were fascists. Like statistically, factually, we can say that, you know. But I think it's true here and in a lot of places. And that's what people need to understand, that the police are the problem. The police are starting the problems, and they are defending what their job is to uphold completely unjust laws. And increasingly, as the society descends further and further into extreme poverty, people recognize that what stands between having a decent life and living in a tent is the police, because they're the ones who are going to be carrying out the evictions, not the investment bankers.
So is that something, like someone who has, because I know you've been involved in activism for quite a while now, have you ever had any interactions with the police that?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, I've been arrested multiple times. I've been pushed and hit, and you know, just, I mean, I'm not even I'm not even a brave protester. I'm never one of the ones who's in the front lines trying to you know, push the police back or whatever, you know. And I have great admiration for all those people who do that stuff, and I'm never one of them. However, I still, and I think I'm very good at avoiding getting hit by the police, and I have lots of strategies I'd be happy to share on how to go to lots and lots of protests where there's a lot of violence going on and avoid getting hurt, because I've done that a lot for many years. But even so, I've still breathed plenty of tear gas and been hit by the police, and it's strange, because the one time I was hit with a club on the back, it didn't feel like much at the time because I had so much adrenaline going on. But I still feel like I can feel that where the club contacted my spine. And maybe I can. I've never tried to, you know, figure out if that's what I'm feeling, or if it's some kind of vestigial, you know, memory or something. Because I don't think he hit me that hard. He's knocked me over though. But anyway, you know, I've had never been, you know, never been terribly brutalized by the police, but certainly. But I've avoided that.
Yeah, I guess you've been fortunate, but not everyone has.
Yeah, and of course. I mean, you know, the most of the police brutality that goes on in society is not necessarily against protesters. It's against various marginalized groups, especially Black and brown people and others that they profile, you know, for just existing. You know, but certainly, it's also true that police going around and fumigating streets of cities with tear gas is not necessarily something that happens in most cities most of the time. So, so people who do have a lot of experience with things like tear gas oftentimes are people who have been involved with protest movements, because if you want to find where the tear gas is being sprayed, then go to, you know, wherever there's a global justice protest or some other kind of thing like that, you know.
I guess it does amplify reasons for protesting, because you're protesting police brutality, and the police response is more brutality.
It is really quite something. And I mean, in some cases in the past, when the protests are all about police brutality, the police tend to vanish for a few days, and they tend to lay low and let things kind of like fizzle out a bit. But that has in the past been sometimes how the police deal with things when they are the subject of the protests, you know. But in this case, I don't know of many cities where the police have been led intelligently by people who are really trying to de-escalate. It just seems like in case after case, it's been the more Trumpian elements among the police forces that have come to the fore, and de-escalation has been, not happening much at all. And I mean, not that de-escalation is the solution here, because of course it's a systemic problem. The laws the police are upholding and the racism that is part of upholding those laws is the problem. But but they're really, I mean, not doing a good job at all of de-escalating. And then of course the National Republican leadership is just, really pouring just massive amounts of fuel on every fire possible.
Not helping.
No, I mean, really quite distinct from prior governments, when they faced uprisings of one kind or another. There have been a lot of words of, trying to chill things out in one way or another. Sometimes they do a terribly bad job of it, but that they still make an effort to, hey, we understand why you're so upset, and we're really going to try to do something about this problem here, and can you please go home? That kind of message. But, with Trump, it's like, these violent anarchists have taken to the streets, and we're going to send in the military and shoot them down.
He's not even pretending.
That's not the message. That's not in the script, in the de-escalation script. No.
So because you mentioned, like, with your music, you quite often have performed at protest rallies. So what role do you think music plays within the protest?
It can play when it's done well, like when sort of the right music and the right organizers, people who are good at organizing and good at picking the music under the right kinds of circumstances. And then when the FBI isn't sabotaging your sound system or whatever else, I mean, good sound and all that under the right combination of circumstances, music can play a really powerful role in protests and social movements generally, and it can really help galvanize people and build community and make events fun and make people want to keep on coming back and help things grow. And it can play a role in popular education and in cross-cultural connecting, because oftentimes musicians are at the foreground and forefront of cross-cultural interaction of all kinds, because musicians just love cross-pollination of all kinds. So generally, so that there's just all kinds of ways that music can play a massive role, but music can also it can potentially play a very divisive role. But more often it can just be ignored. And I mean, the music and the divisive role I'm talking about is like the music industry and how they use music and how music is used by the authorities in many ways, which is actually it's used as a tool for racial oppression, and it's used as a tool for turning everybody into zombies, basically to just think about romance and drinking and sex and go to sleep and stop worrying about politics.
There could be that aspect to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think for a lot of the people, I mean, I'm only just kind of realizing this, but I mean, I think it's probably true that for a lot of the people who are organizing protests, who are on, who are organizing social movements and stuff like that, who don't use music or who don't realize the potential that music and art have to build the movement they're working on. I think part of the problem for them is that they only think of music the way that the music industry thinks of it, and they may not be even conscious of it, but they think of music as being a frivolous phenomenon, or even just like counterproductive, because in many ways it is the way the music industry uses it. But I always also thought that the intellectuals, oftentimes who are involved with social movements, oftentimes compartmentalize, and they don't think about the overall picture and how important culture is. But I think that's probably less of the problem, and more of the problem is just the music industry has had such a negative impact on our society that also includes organizers on the left who unfortunately have forgotten, under the influence of the music industry, how powerful music and culture is.
And that's something, when you look out throughout the history of different movements, music's always played an important role.
It sure has, absolutely. And that's like pretty easy to sort of document all along the way. And even in terms of remembering history, like if it weren't for songs having been written about some of the massacres that have happened in the course of like the early 20th century labor wars, which is not that long ago, I mean, some of the history might have been basically lost to the historians of any kind. It's amazing how tenuous a lot of that is. You think of history as being something that's in a book, and it's like it's somehow preserved almost like a stone or something. But actually it's all just in people's heads and in books that may or may not still be in print, or may not be findable in any form, or it may have never been documented. I mean, and so much of the media that was around back then, I mean, that it's not like it's been preserved. It's not like it exists on the internet or in any form. Like so many of the newspapers that would have been covering some of these massacres, like you try finding all the issues of the Italian anarchist press from New York in 1920. I mean, a lot of that stuff got burned and destroyed, and it's gone.
I even know of myself. I mean, I try to keep up with the news and whatnot. As someone with a short attention span, a lot of my education came from songs. So
that's another great thing about songs. That you can learn. I mean, they're not as good as a book in terms of really how much information you can impart in a song, but you can really introduce anyone to a basic subject of any kind or a story of any kind in a song. And then this song has this potential, this power, which has now been proven by scientists to exist, which is that when words are sung, they go to different parts of the brain than when words are spoken. And that you can really viscerally get a feeling about a historical event or a current event through music in a way that you won't get through most other forms of communication.
Yep, and quite often we'll encourage you to do the research. So like Bob Dylan writes a song that mentions Medgar Evers. It's like, okay, who is he? So you look it up, you do the research, and with a lot of your songs, you mentioned certain events. So some of those events I may not be familiar with. So it's like, okay, I go out and do the research, and I think it plays a valuable role that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Cindy Sheehan used to say that she would come to my concerts with a notebook so she could, take notes for further research later.
Yeah. So definitely, we mentioned your music and activism. So sometimes people assume they're two separate things, but for you, they seem to be very much linked, that the music's definitely an extension of your activism.
Well, I definitely, I think music and activism are both of a great value just on their own, but they work well together for sure. And I mean, I love music just for music's sake, but I think it's also a really powerful tool for communication of any kind, very much including of the sort of activist popular education kind.
Good. So there's one subject we touched upon a little bit, but this is something I noticed you do write about a lot. Like you quite often have written songs about renter strikes and connection with housing issues.
Mm-hmm.
So why is that an issue that you're drawn towards?
I think basically I question whether we as a society, especially in the United States, but in many other countries as well, but really especially here, whether we've ever really graduated from feudalism. Because what it comes, I mean, what does it mean to live in a supposedly democratic society when you have no democratic control over really basic things like whether you can live anywhere or afford to live anywhere? This is really the land was the land question, as it used to be called, was never resolved, and you have feudal landlords from Europe that were given the land here, and then you have settlers, white settlers, who then were given more land as the country expanded at the expense of the indigenous people from whose whom the land was stolen. But also, like, to the extent that it was distributed among some element of the population, like the white population, it was distributed so unevenly, and then in a way that was where it was set up so that intelligent, wealthy people could get much more wealthy by through real estate speculation. I mean, we have a system that's set up to make the rich richer and make everybody else just struggle for basic necessities like housing. And it has gotten to a point now where, like in Portland, where the rents have doubled and tripled over the past 20 years for me and for most other renters. So it's gotten more and more to the point, especially since the global financial crisis of 2008, more and more insane. So it just can't be ignored by people anymore. It's just so obviously the issue. And before the pandemic, when people talked about the crisis, anywhere on the West Coast, also, of course, including in British Columbia, where the situation is very similar, unfortunately. I mean, there are some differences, like the fact that, like you have some form of universal basic income at the moment during the pandemic, but basically, British Columbia is a disaster in terms of real estate, in terms of like affordable housing. I mean, just like the rest of the West Coast, and it's increasingly been just recognized as this is the crisis. That's the crisis that people were talking about. I mean, you didn't even need to say the housing crisis. It was just, and then of course you look around at the people. I mean, you see so many people are barely holding on to their housing, and there are lots of visible signs of that. And then, of course, the signs of the people who have lost their housing entirely is even more visible. And it's just this. If the Depression, if the Great Depression, if color photography existed in the 1930s, then I think there would be a lot more connections being made between now and then. Because the main difference is that the tents are made of plastic instead of canvas, and they're bright colors, and they're instead of like black and white or what. I mean, I don't even know what the colors of the tents were in the 1930s. In all the pictures, they're gray. I said maybe they were green, maybe they were maroon. I have no idea, but in the pictures they're gray, and of course all the guys wore hats back then. So there are certain distinctions. But it looks like the Depression around here.
So it's an important issue to highlight.
Yeah, it's just overwhelming. I think basically it's. I mean, I write about a lot of other things, but that's definitely the thing I write about probably the most, and it just affects so many people. It's profound. and even more so now. And I've written about it more since the pandemic too, because I mean, it is even more an issue now. I mean, even as our as the vice presidential candidate for the Democrats said in the recent debate, she mentioned that you know, even in mainstream circles, it's being frequently mentioned. More than half of renters in this country are currently not sure whether they're going to be able to pay rent next month.
Yeah,
that's the statistic right
that's
now.
scary.
I mean, that's like, if that's not scary, I don't know what is, you know, in terms of like societal, you know, collapse, you know.
Yeah. When you're already living paycheck to paycheck and lose that paycheck.
Yeah, and then you lose the unemployment, which ran out at the end of July for those who are lucky enough to manage to get on it in the first place.
It's scary. So we mentioned how, so basically most of us in some way or another has been adversely affected with the pandemic, but we've also, something like we talked a little bit before I hit record, musicians are definitely struggling, and we're even struggling before the pandemic hit, but with the pandemic, we've lost the touring income. I know even prior to the outbreak, this is something I know you've spoken about. You wrote the song "A Penny a Play," which addresses the ridiculously low amount per stream that musicians receive from streaming services. So, what changes would you like to see made within the recording industry to help musicians, especially independent musicians that are already struggling to support themselves?
I mean, I think it's one thing that could be. There's so many things that could be done potentially, but one of the things that could be done globally and that has affected musicians globally in a profound way, at least among the musicians like me and like so many others who are basically creating content, recording it, selling CDs or downloads or making our music available for streaming. What happened in 2013 when Spotify started their free tier? I mean, it's like hard to explain to people who are not in the music industry, you know, sort of what that meant and how they did that, you know, and how they managed to sort of do this sort of coup in a way. Like, I mean, but with the corporate control of platforms, it's kind of inevitable. But, and I don't know, without getting into, you know, too much tedious detail, you know, before 2013, Spotify did not have a free tier, and so what that effectively meant was between the late 90s and 2013, the situation was basically more or less that streaming and streaming music was something that a lot of mainstream record labels and musicians were basically trying to avoid, and it was associated with piracy and with illegal practices. And those of us who did make our music available for free for streaming, which included me, were doing it voluntarily. And we were doing it in order to reach the widest audience, but also in order to undermine the music industry, and in order to actually not only build an audience, but make a better living, because by building the audience, we'd get more people coming to our shows, and we'd ultimately actually sell more albums, strangely enough. But in 2013, all of that, I mean, the model, it's not like it was like an easy to explain business model or anything that was working brilliantly or anything. But basically, me and a lot of other people, I was making a decent living as a touring musician up until 2013, even in the age of, you know, and this was well after YouTube existed and all kinds of other streaming platforms, you know, and but when Spotify made, and by the way, basically since the 90s, with platforms like CD Baby, musicians from around the world had been putting our music up for digital distribution through that platform. So that's why you could find all our music on places like iTunes and Spotify in the first place. But then when Spotify did their free tier, then suddenly actually for the first time, people who were not really tech savvy and who were not basically everybody suddenly had access to everything that had ever been recorded for free. All and that's and that just and without the artists being compensated, which is the reason why the model works. Because before they did that, artists were getting paid. It was still really obtuse and hard to figure out what was going on, but basically artists were getting paid something closer to a penny a play.
Yeah.
And what happened then with Spotify's free tier is it's gone down to an estimated something like 1/10 of a cent per play, and that varies every month according to this bizarre and unclear formula. But basically, it's the kind of the way it used to be. Even with streaming, even getting the amount of streams that I get now under the old system, 15 years ago, even without selling CDs, I could be paying the rent on the streams I'm getting. But with Spotify somehow basically making sure that no matter how much streams people get, we never make any money. It's just of course there's loads of musicians out there who don't get many streams and who don't realize how big of an impact this has had, or musicians who are too young to have ever known what it was like to sell albums on a tour and make half your income from that. Of course there's just so much changing all the time, but Spotify has been if you're going to pick one villain, they're the villain. And they are, and they and all the other streaming platforms need to be forced by some kind of entity that's able to do that. And I'm not sure exactly what that would be. Certainly the US government would have to be involved, and maybe the World Trade Organization. I have no idea. Musicians have to have a movement. There has to be a social movement, but ultimately somehow or other, Spotify and the other entities have to be forced to have a transparent system of how they distribute royalties that is not dependent on some kind of mysterious algorithm or their earnings or something. I mean, if they're going to be basically licensing our music to use it to distribute on their platform, and if they think they can do that for free, then they should figure out how they're going to pay us a penny a play, at least, while they make their free platform. And if they can't figure out how to pay us a penny a play, then they shouldn't be running a free platform, and they never should have made it free in the first place. And basically, they should cease to exist, and they should be sued into bankruptcy, and they should be eaten by vultures.
I guess the problem is because you mentioned the musicians standing up. Ones I guess you need standing up are probably the bigger name artists that probably aren't affected to the same degree.
I mean, it's just hard to imagine, how this kind of. I mean, it's basically it's like, for people who aren't in the music world, who are in the physical world, think about Uber, because Spotify is the Uber of the music industry, and just think about how are you going to organize against Uber when it's a international company that doesn't really employ people, that just it only employs people who use their app and all this. I mean, it's very challenging, and of course it has successfully undermined the taxi business, and it is much cheaper and much better organized than taxis were. And certainly by the same token, Spotify is free, and it has having access to high quality music from throughout history from around the world. I mean, it's obvious why people would use it. It comes bundled with your phone half the time. Of course people are going to use it just like they use the highway instead of walking down the dirt road. If the highway exists, you're going to use it. But it's a question of how, who's funding it and how, and who's profiting from it. And, right now it's just all about the corporations.
Yeah, it is something like even myself, I'm trying to, because I use Spotify, and technically I do pay for it every month, but I realize my $10 a month doesn't really help.
Yeah,
independent
unfortunately. I
musician.
mean, if the model were done differently, that
Yeah.
$10 could be immense and could make all the
Yeah.
difference. But yeah, it doesn't. The way they had that, many people don't realize this, but the way Spotify is set up, that $10 you pay for a premium account does not go to paying the artist any more than
Yeah.
they'd be getting otherwise.
So I'm trying to be conscious of that. Obviously, I'm limited for what I could do, but
I
sometimes
don't think you should blame
even music
yourself
I can
for it.
access on Spotify, I'll sometimes purchase on Bandcamp, and I'll still be
But
listed on
but I
Spotify, and sometimes I'll do things like that.
I mean, it's great
But
to
you do need a
do
more
that.
just system because
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's great to support artists for
yeah,
sure, and to do Bandcamp and Patreon and
yeah,
to support artists for sure. But I think I would just say that people shouldn't feel bad about using Spotify or some other free streaming platform. It's just it shouldn't be blame the consumers
yeah,
kind of thing. I think it should be about taking on and organizing against these massive corporations,
yeah,
because I think the overwhelming majority of music consumers, especially, I mean, if we're going to use an industry term like that, consumers of independent musicians
yeah,
content, I think the overwhelming majority of them don't want to be exploiting
yeah,
musicians, or they want the musicians to be surviving too.
yeah,
But it's just yeah. So I mean, but they can't be expected necessarily to figure out how to support all the musicians they want to support through Patreon. And musicians shouldn't be expected all to be able to set up the Patreon thing and do their online begging. I mean,
yeah,
it's great that these platforms exist, and I'm glad I'm good at begging, and it's really helpful. And of course, there's like things like NPR here that exist through that same kind of model. So the model is not new, and but it's like it should be in the law and in the basic structure of things, that musicians just get paid decent, something reasonable for all the streaming.
yeah. There should be something in place, and hopefully, eventually, there will be.
Yeah, I hope so.
So we talked a little bit about your music. So as a musician, who is some of the musical influences?
I would say, um, well, I mean, it's in terms of individuals, certainly a guy named Jim Page from Seattle is the first and biggest musical influence for me, and as a songwriter and as a musician. And then then there's a lot of others. Phil Oakes, certainly,
Okay,
Pete Seeger,
definitely
Woody
good. Yeah,
Guthrie,
those are legends.
Bob Dylan, the legends,
Yeah,
certainly Buffy St. Marie, and just a heck of a lot of random, bluegrass, Irish traditional music, Afro pop. Christy Moore, Rob Johnson from England. A lot of those influences came later. I didn't meet Rob until I was already doing music for a long time. But Christy Moore from Ireland was an earlier influence.
okay.
I mean, getting off the hitchhiking a ride up to Seattle when I was like 19 or 20, and then going to the Pike Place Market and hearing Jim Page busking in the street was definitely the most musical awakening moment of my young adulthood, for sure. And that's what hearing him singing his extremely incisive songs about very current events. I mean, he was like my model for, like, something would happen in the world and he'd have a song about it the next day, and and he'd be singing it in the streets, and the songs he wrote were so good, and I just really just set out to be Jim Page, literally a Jim Page cover artist, and then I wanted to write songs like Jim, and and I went about trying to do that, and I think I have succeeded.
Yep, you
I
definitely
mean,
do a
I
good
would
job
say,
of writing the topical songs.
yeah, I think at this point, after working at it for like 20 years, I think I'm in, I might be in Jim's league as a songwriter, and if I am, then that would be the highest compliment anyone could ever say about me.
Definitely do an excellent job of writing those songs.
Thanks.
So,
Thank you.
and as we mentioned before, you're a musical journalist, so.
Yeah, definitely. It's musical journalism, and Bob Dylan insulted that concept and threw Phil Oakes out of the taxi in 1961 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And this is like a legendary moment in the minds of so many fans of topical music, and it has scarred so many people. And while I would say that bad songwriting is not useful in any context, if you're doing a good job at it, then there's nothing wrong with it being basically a journalistic endeavor. You know, so you can be a good songwriter and a good musical journalist all at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's a fine thing to do. And also, Dylan also scarred a lot of people back then by talking about how you should only write about what you know, which is another piece of shit that he which he luckily never practiced himself. He wrote
That's the thing he
lots of
wrote. I
songs.
mean, obviously, eventually got out of it a little bit. He
I mean,
wrote
even
some of the best topical songs.
Exactly. Later he did, after he said that about how you have to write about what you know. Yeah. He went through that phase of writing only, about what he knew. But before and after that, he was writing great stuff about other people. And that's what he should be. That's what people should remember more than the stupid shit he said when he was a hippie in the late 60s.
Yeah. Dylan's fascinating that way, that there's so many contradictions there.
So many contradictions and so many phases, and of course, and I'm not suggesting he should be held to anything he said when he was 18 years old, by any means. But so fascinating. But I mean, but the fact is that things he has said at different points in his career have had such an impact on such large groups of people who don't necessarily think about other things he said at other points in his career that totally contradicted whatever it was that they're holding on to. And sometimes it's the industry.
That's why some of it with him, the guy's a legend, one of the most influential artists ever, but some of the things he say you almost have to take with a grain of salt.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. But we have his music, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Good. So before we conclude, is there anything else you want to say or plug?
Nothing in particular. This has been a wonderful, wide-ranging discussion, so it's been really nice. But nothing in particular. I used to always have some kind of last words having to do with why we should all be hopeful, but that just seems like a little trite at this point.
You don't have to. Is there anything you want people to check out? Or I know you got a new album. Say their name.
Oh yeah.
So I don't think it's on Spotify, but I know it's on Bandcamp.
Yeah, it's on Bandcamp, and it will be on Spotify and all the other streaming platforms by November 1st. And I just set up a web page for the album, which includes a poster people can print out and a whole bunch of videos and a playlist that's related to the subject material of the album, basically. And it's at davidrovics.com/say-their-names.
Okay, good. So I'll encourage the listeners to check that out. So thanks again. I definitely enjoyed our discussion.
Me too. Thanks so much.